A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who celebrate them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns, and I bet you're wondering, what is the difference between Star Wars canon and Star Wars Legends? Wait, you actually weren't asking that question when you clicked on this? That's okay. I'm going to talk about it anyway. We've mentioned both Legends and canon on this show multiple times already, so I figured it's a good time to finally clarify the difference, because there is a difference, a big difference. And if you pick up any random book and don't know the difference, you might be a little confused. So the goal is to make you less confused. Hopefully, by the end of this episode, you will no longer wonder to yourself, why do people keep talking about canon and legends? I don't understand. This is why we're here, to make sure you know what's going on. This is what happens when I go off script. This is not, everything's fine. Let's start by clarifying that canon doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. It's a word that is used often to talk about things such as Star Wars, but it's specifically in terms of Star Wars book publishing. A canon novel, that's capital C, is any Star Wars book published in 2014 onwards. So like Princess and the Scoundrel, which just came out last month, still canon in 2022. If it was published before 2014, it's considered Legends, capital L. Basically, when Disney acquired Lucasfilm, I almost said it the other way around. Lucasfilm did not acquire Disney. That would be absolutely wild. When that happened, they wanted to tell a different post-Return of the Jedi story on the big screen. And that's different than the story the books had told beyond that point in the timeline. But instead of erasing those stories from existence, they are still around. They still matter. We'll get into that. They rebranded everything that came before that acquisition and all that change as Legends. You might hear people refer to the EU or the expanded universe when they're talking about books or anything that's not a movie. That's what it was called before it became Legends. Some people still call books, etc., the EU, and they're technically not wrong. But basically the two terms, Legends, EU, are referring to the same thing, for the most part, in most cases. It's probably easiest to think of canon and Legends as two separate Star Wars timelines. Canon events actually happened in the current continuity, while Legends are kind of like stories told within the larger fictional story of Star Wars, if that makes sense. I hope that wasn't too confusing. It was a lot of words in one sentence. These Legend stories still matter. They just don't follow the same plot points as the movies, basically. Legends books, if we're talking about the span of the timeline, start with the Old Republic, which is thousands of years before the original trilogy, and end so far forward in the same timeline that Han and Leia have a grandchild. She's the daughter of a Sith Lord. It's a whole thing. Highly recommend reading and understanding what that's all about, because it's wild, and I say that with all the praise. The first Star Wars novel that wasn't a novelization, because the Star Wars A New Hope, before it was called that, novelization came out before the movie. Before the movie came out in 1977. So there's that. And then there was Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which came out in 1978. Fun fact about this book that I love for some reason is that it wasn't confirmed yet in the development of the story that Luke and Leia were siblings. So there's like a vibe there, like a romantic vibe. It's a lot, but that pretty much sums up all of Legends ever. These books really took off in the early 90s when Timothy Zahn published Heir to the Empire and the two books that followed that. And authors just kept cranking out these books, one after the other. That's why there are so many, until 2013. John Jackson Miller's Kenobi novel barely made the cut. It's Legends, but almost wasn't Legends, or didn't happen because of how closely it happened in the whole process. It's still good though. Like, if you liked the show, read the book. I'm not going to go on a tangent about it because we will talk about it eventually at some point, because it's one of my favorite Star Wars books ever. I've only read it once. I need to read it again. So back to what we're actually talking about, because once again, when I go off script, it's a disaster. Starting in 2014, every book that was published was considered canon. So all these stories reflected what could be called the new canon timeline. And that's the story that aligns with what happens in the sequel trilogy. There are major differences in terms of plot and characters, but many of the themes and ideas that Legends really touched on, especially in the time after Return of the Jedi, a lot of them are very similar because it's Star Wars, and essentially every story hits the main messages that Star Wars tries to tell, because that's the whole point. So far, the earliest canon novel in the timeline, in the new timeline, in this timeline, is The High Republic's Light of the Jedi, which takes place a few hundred years before the prequel trilogy. And the latest book in the timeline, not the one most recently released, but in terms of how far past, let's say, the original trilogy, is the Rise of Skywalker novelization. So there has not been a canon story that has expanded beyond that movie. Lego doesn't count. Like, it's not canon. It's great, but we can dream that there are stories after. Whether or not there actually will be stories in books or otherwise that go beyond the Skywalker saga in terms of timeline, we don't know. We don't know when or if. We're all just sitting here waiting, wondering if it's going to happen. We'll see. So when you're searching for Star Wars books and you are looking for this distinction between canon and legends, if it matters to you, and in some cases it will, if you're following a certain timeline or you don't want to get confused. So now, any Legends book that is printed has a handy little golden banner on the top, on the front cover, that says Legends. So they're making it easy for you. The thing is that if it was printed before Legends became Legends, it will not have that banner. So if you have two hardcovers side by side, one canon, one Legends, by the covers you wouldn't be able to tell. It doesn't say, because before Legends existed, it wasn't called anything, so it was just a Star Wars book, so that's why that's not on there. And there's nothing on canon books that say canon. Like, it's just there. So the internet really is going to be your best friend here, because if you look on, if you find a book, like say you're at a resale shop or at a garage sale and you find a random Star Wars book and it doesn't have a banner and you don't know just by the name or the author, or even you could look at the publication date, but if you don't want to do that, Goodreads or bookshop.org, you can look it up and it will say this is a Legends book, because basically what they try to do, or what they should do, is they will include the Legends branding in the name, in the cover. That's just where they're trying to make it easier for everyone. That's also why the Essential Legends collection exists. I'm not going to go more into that now, but there's a reason why they are doing that. Also, you might be wondering now, or not, like maybe I'm putting questions into your brain. It's my podcast. I can do whatever I want. So if you're wondering, if you happen to be wondering at all ever, where do the film novelizations fall into all of this? Well, good news. It's not totally clear, but I'm going to try to clear it up for you, because what are they? If the movies are canon, but books published before 2014 are not, then let's say the not Rise of Skywalker, what's that movie called? The Revenge of the Sith novelization. Let's say you have that was published way before 2014. So is it canon, or is it Legends, or is it something else? Something else. It happens to be the correct answer in this case. Some websites, some people might use the term canon adjacent. Some people just classify them as Legends. It's not canon, so it does make sense that you would put them in Legends. You're not technically wrong if you do that. So I said I'm not going to make this complicated, and like here I am probably making it more complicated. So let's keep it simple. Back to the Revenge of the Sith novelization. Side note, if you haven't read it, please fix that. It is the most unique Star Wars book that exists, and that is a good thing. Highly recommend. I will say that probably in every episode of the show, and I'm not sorry about it. Okay, so this book, it is not technically canon. The movie it is based on is canon, but it's sort of like a retelling of a quote-unquote true story, right? We can kind of classify all Star Wars novelizations as this. It's based on a story that's already been told. So I don't put my novelizations with my canon books, like just mixed in. I don't put them with my legends either, though. I like to treat them, and this is just my personal way of doing it. They're kind of their own separate thing. So the novelizations get their own section. They're all together because they are that weird kind of in between of like based on canon, but technically not. They're pretty unique to Star Wars books as a whole, and they don't really fit into one particular category, and I kind of like that. They're very special. Again, if you haven't read those, we'll talk about them. I read all of them. It was like my goal at one point to read them all, and they're great. If you think that I never have anything bad to say about Star Wars books, it's pretty much true. This is how I am in real life. There are people that can attest to that. So when you're reading a novelization, it's sort of like you're reading the movie, but a slightly different version. It's fun. Try it sometime. So there you have it. That is a simple breakdown. Is it simple? Is anything simple? Of the difference between Star Wars canon and Star Wars legends. As simple as I can make it. I promise I am trying. All of this will be written out. I will have subheadings. I will try to make it even easier for you to get, because maybe me talking is not helping. There's a link. You can go there and read. It might be better. Canon and legends. You can read both. Both are equally important. Just because one is canon and one is quote-unquote not canon, it doesn't make one or the other better or worse for the most part. You know, not every book is perfect. There are a lot of legends books. Some of them, you know, they're just their own thing, and that's great. If you read both, like at the same time, you might have to do a little extra mental work to keep yourself in the correct timeline, and, you know, remember that like Mara Jade is a Legends character and Thrawn is both. That's not confusing at all. He has two different stories. Same character, different points in time. It's fine. It's okay. You got this. I believe in you. And of course, if I've just not explained any of this clearly and you have more questions or you need me to clarify things, you know where to find me. The links to all of my presences on the internet are in the show notes. That's kind of terrifying to think about, that you can find me wherever, but like you can't really, right? Like I can respond. I will try to respond. I'm here to help you. I promise. Also, because I mentioned it before, if you're wondering, here we go, me assuming that you're wondering things about Star Wars books at all hours of the day. What is the Essential Legends Collection? I'm so glad you asked. Stay tuned for an episode all about that very, very soon. Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network and is written, produced, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. Keep up with the show on Twitter at Star Wars Lit Pod, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support the show, just tell everyone you know how much you love it, because that's often how people hear about Star Wars podcasts, because there are so many. So just talk about it. Give it a shout out, you know, whatever you want to do. For more book reviews and Star Wars book celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram.